Most people assume food security comes from money, refrigerators, or constant shopping. I used to think the same. Then I started reading about traditional food systems, and I realized that this belief is new, fragile, and historically wrong. For most of human history, people fed themselves year-round without electricity, freezers, or supermarkets. I wanted to see if I could do it myself, and I discovered that the secret wasn't magic. It was choosing the right crops and storing them correctly. Once I understood that system, free food for 12 months stopped feeling like a fantasy and became a solvable planning problem. If you want food that lasts, I learned the hard way that you don't start in the kitchen, you start in the garden. Some crops are naturally designed to sit quietly, unchanged, for months after harvest. Others are not. Modern gardening culture focuses on fresh eating, but traditional food systems focused on survival through winter. I wanted to know which crops actually lasted, so I tested dozens in my own garden. This video is about the crops I've tried, the ones that wait patiently while everything else rots. The first rule of year-round food without refrigeration is simple. Grow crops that store themselves. That means dense calories, low moisture, protective skins, and dormant biology. These aren't salad crops, they are foundation crops. I started with potatoes. Potatoes aren't just fresh vegetables. I treat them like underground batteries. The first time I tried storing them, I made the mistake of washing them early. Within weeks, they started rotting. I quickly learned that dirt isn't the enemy, light and heat are. Once I cured them properly and kept them in darkness, cool temperatures, and moderate humidity, they lasted 6 to 9 months. That first winter, I watched them quietly feed my family while everything else spoiled. I realized that proper storage was as important as planting the right crop. Right alongside potatoes, I experimented with sweet potatoes. This is where climate matters. I cured them at warm temperatures for about 10 days before storage. Once cured, they stored exceptionally well in dry, moderately warm conditions. In my tests, sweet potatoes often outlasted regular potatoes. They are calorie-dense, nutritionally rich, and incredibly space-efficient. These aren't novelty crops, they are survival crops. I also discovered that leaving them too cool or too damp drastically shortened their storage life. That little detail can make or break your winter supply. Then I discovered winter squash, pumpkins, butternut, Hubbard, kabocha. These aren't vegetables. I treat them as sealed containers of food. Harvested, mature, and cured properly, winter squash can last 4 to 8 months without refrigeration. Some even lasted longer in my own pantry. Stored dry, off the floor, and with airflow, their starch slowly converts to sugar, improving flavor over time. One plant fed my family repeatedly through winter. I also learned that resting them on straw or wooden slats, not concrete, helps prevent moisture damage. That small adjustment doubled their shelf life in my experience. Next, I learned the difference between green beans and dry beans the hard way. Green beans are fine for meals, but they don't store. Dry beans, on the other hand, are shelf-stable protein. I left some dry beans in jars, sealed from moisture and pests, and they lasted years. Beans are why civilizations survived crop failures. They fix nitrogen in the soil while growing and provide protein when nothing else does. I now think of them as structural food, not optional. I also tried storing them in burlap sacks, and I noticed slight losses from humidity. I switched to airtight glass jars and never had a problem again. Corn taught me another lesson. Sweet corn is for fresh eating, but dry corn, dent corn, flour corn, popcorn, is storage food. I dried it properly and it became a calorie reserve that required no refrigeration, electricity, or constant attention. In traditional systems, corn was always dried first. That small distinction changed how I thought about all my crops. I even experimented with different drying methods, sun drying, stringing ears in my attic, and low-heat ovens, and found that airflow mattered more than temperature. Onions were next. Technique matters more than variety. I learned that onions only store when their necks dry completely and their skins tighten. Harvested too early, they rot. Once dried properly, they lasted months. I hung them in braids, laid them on shelves with airflow, and noticed the difference immediately. They aren't just flavor, they make stored food edible, digestible, and repeatable. I even tried storing them in mesh bags versus hanging, and hanging won every time. Garlic was a revelation. It stores easily, needs little space, and offers both food and medicine. Properly cured garlic lasts 6 to 10 months. Some varieties last even longer. I realized garlic doesn't demand cold. It demands dryness and airflow. In my experience, garlic was insurance against hunger, against illness, against bland meals when morale mattered. I also experimented with different curing techniques, baskets, trays, and mesh sacks, and found slight differences in shelf life. Cabbage was the bridge crop for me. Alone, it doesn't store long, but when fermented, it becomes something entirely new. Sauerkraut isn't just a side dish. It's preserved calories, vitamins, and gut health in a jar. I started fermenting cabbage in batches, and it filled gaps in my winter pantry without any refrigeration. The first batch I made was too salty. The second batch hit the perfect balance. Trial and error taught me that small details matter. Root crops like carrots, beets, turnips, rutabaga, and parsnips also surprised me. Stored in damp sand, soil, or sawdust in a cool environment, they last for months. These crops evolved to overwinter underground. I realized I was just continuing that process above ground. I even tested layering carrots in different materials. Sand worked best for me, followed by sawdust. Apples completed my storage system. Not all apples store. I learned to choose late season, thick-skinned varieties, which can last 4 to 6 months in cool, dark storage. I stacked and checked them regularly, and yes, one bad apple can spoil others. But managed correctly, they extend fresh food deep into winter. I experimented with wrapping them individually in paper, and it added an extra month of shelf life in my own pantry. Another layer I discovered is flexibility. Stored food isn't just calories, it's options. Potatoes can be boiled, baked, mashed, fried, fermented, or used as thickener. Beans become soups, stews, spreads, or flours. Squash can be roasted, pureed, baked, or dried. This adaptability is what keeps me fed when conditions change. I also learned about loss tolerance. Fresh food systems are fragile. Miss a harvest window and it's gone. Storage systems forgive mistakes. Potatoes harvested a little early still last month. Squash with a surface scar still stores. Onions, slightly small, still function. Storage crops are resilient by design. They expect handling. They expect delay. That matters in real life, where gardens aren't perfect and schedules aren't predictable. Energy use became another eye-opener. Refrigeration requires electricity, infrastructure, and constant operation. Stored crops? Nothing. Once placed correctly, they rest while I work on other tasks. That efficiency is rarely discussed, but it changed how I plan my garden. I noticed a psychological shift, too. When my pantry is visible, I waste less, plan better, and eat seasonally without forcing it. Hidden food feels infinite. Visible, stored food teaches limits and abundance simultaneously. That awareness creates discipline without stress. This system scales quietly. One year, I stored enough for 3 months, the next year 6, then 9, then a full year. Each season builds on the last. Skills improve. Losses decrease. Variety increases. Compounding systems always outperform quick fixes. I also observed how these crops work together underground and above. Potatoes loosen soil, beans feed it, squash shades it, onions repel pests. This wasn't accidental. Traditional gardens were ecosystems designed around storage outcomes. Harvest was only one step. Continuity was the goal. Food security, I discovered, isn't isolation. When I grow storage crops, I trade, share, and exchange knowledge. Communities historically survived because no one grew everything perfectly, but everyone grew something reliably. Storage crops made cooperation possible because they were predictable. At this point, most people realize something uncomfortable. This isn't about gardening harder, it's about gardening smarter. If this way of thinking is new to you, that's exactly why Science Garden exists. Understanding food systems instead of chasing seasonal trends changes everything. Systems compound over years, and every season you delay is food you never harvest. Storage conditions matter more than most realize. I learned that refrigeration isn't required, but environment is. Most crops want cool, not cold, dark, not sealed, dry or slightly humid depending on the crop. Potatoes want cool and humid. Squash wants dry and cool. Onions and garlic want dry and airy. Mixing crops without understanding their needs caused losses for me early on. Traditional homes had multiple storage areas. I recreated that in my basement, creating zones with slight temperature differences. You don't need perfection, you need consistency. Timing is critical. Storage crops must be harvested mature. Immature or overripe food rots. I learned that potatoes harvested too early bleed energy. Squash harvested before skins harden collapses. Beans harvested wet mold. Timing makes the difference between months and weeks. And the biggest myth? You don't need a huge garden. You need density and calories. A few beds of potatoes, squash trained outward, beans grown vertically, onions packed tightly. My small, intentional garden feeds better than a large, chaotic one. What you're really building is a calendar. Potatoes from autumn to spring, squash from fall through winter, beans year-round, onions and garlic bridging seasons, ferments filling gaps, apples extending freshness. When one crop ends, another takes over. That is the system. There's dignity in this way of growing. I'm not dependent on weekly availability. I'm not rushed by spoilage. I'm not pressured by trends. I feed myself on my terms, quietly, consistently, without drama. That is what free food for 12 months actually means. The effort is front-loaded, intentional, and respectful of time. Work when the soil is warm so you can eat when it is cold. Plan when others react. Over time, that difference becomes permanent. This is how real food systems endure. Not through abundance alone, but through foresight. Not through technology, but through understanding. Once you build it, you realize it was never complicated, it was just forgotten. Grow what stores, store what lasts, eat without panic. That is how food security actually works. From my garden to your understanding to your table.